I vividly remember trying to speak to a cashier, and she was Russian, and she told me, "You have to learn Russian. You're living in Little Russia, kid. This isn't Ukraine." And I still remember that till this day. Many Russians today do see themselves as that kind of superior, group of people because they were the ones in power in that time period, and they ruled over Ukraine. Many people simply didn't want to speak Ukrainian on the streets. It was pretty much a "we're better than you" kind of attitude. They see themselves as almost this kind of older brotherly figure.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Salute Ukraine. Today I'm joined by a pro-Ukraine activist named Yaroslav Ponomarov. Yaroslav is a New Yorker, actually was born in Ukraine but grew up in Brighton Beach in Brooklyn. I met Yaroslav at a protest in Times Square just last week, and I'm excited to be interviewing him today to learn more about pro-Ukraine activism, especially here in New York. Yaroslav, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You grew up in Brighton Beach, right?
Yes, my family would move to Brighton Beach, and that's where we would stay.
So I know a little bit about Brighton Beach, but probably most of our viewers don't know the significance of that to Ukraine and the current situation. So what is Brighton Beach?
Brighton Beach is a quite old and historical neighborhood in Coney Island that's located in South Brooklyn. It is well known for being an old Slavic neighborhood. It's not just Ukrainian, even though it did have that nickname of being Little Odessa. The first immigrants who would come there and kind of lay their claim there were from Odessa, and over time you would really see many Soviet dissidents overall come there. It has a wide variety of nicknames. When I moved to Brighton Beach, a lot of people simply refer to it as Little Russia. Growing up there, people my age would sometimes refer to it as the Little Soviet Union, just because there was such a diverse mix of peoples from all of the different Soviet states in Russia too. And it's this weird little town where it's not just one group of people that kind of own it. It's a little bit of everybody, and it has its own kind of unique culture to it, its own history, its own stereotypes too. When I talk to other Ukrainians, for example, and tell them about Brighton Beach, they have a certain idea of it, and they'll automatically kind of stereotype me to some degree because they know that it's not just a Ukrainian neighborhood, that it's just so mixed.
It's also a very Jewish neighborhood. If I remember the history correctly, I read about it. It was Russian Jews that kind of got the neighborhood starting. Not so much in recent years, but the one time I visited Brighton Beach, I noticed a lot of Jewish old age homes and just Jewish institutions there. Was that a part of the neighborhood when you were growing up?
It certainly was. There is a very large Jewish presence in the area, especially around Ocean Parkway. It is something that exists there, and it was a part of growing up. It never really had any impact on me. You can find everybody there, but of course, yes, there's a lot of Jewish people there.
So you mentioned that in Brighton Beach, you have all of these different communities. I know in the last 10 years, there's been a lot more immigration from Central Asia. So, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, places like that. But when you were growing up, what was relations in the neighborhood like? You have people from all these different countries, ethnic and religious backgrounds, brought together by elements of Slavic culture. How does that all come together?
Oh, wow, that's a long story. It really depends on the time period. I would say this: when I first moved here as a child, I couldn't speak Russian. I only spoke Ukrainian. And I vividly remember it was at some point during the first year I was here, walking into a store and trying to purchase something. My mom gave me a little bit of money. She said, "Go buy this." And I vividly remember trying to speak to a cashier, and she was Russian, and she told me, "You have to learn Russian. You're living in Little Russia, kid. This isn't Ukraine." And I still remember that till this day. In the early to mid 2000s, it was a very Russian-dominated neighborhood. So for a lot of us Ukrainians and even other people, we certainly had people from the Central Asia region there already. It was really a thing where even though there might be many of us, we understood that this is a very Russian-dominated neighborhood, and that had its own kind of dynamic where we had to certainly respect that because we didn't want there to be violence and issues. There are stories about, for example, organized crime, like the Russian mafia existing and all of that, which they certainly probably did, but they didn't really have much of an impact on, the way things were within the neighborhood. But I would say this, it was peaceful, but there was certainly quite a bit of tension if matters of Russia, Ukraine, and Ukrainian identity were brought up, or
So can you get into that a bit? Sorry to interrupt, but I just don't even have the foundational context. If we take away 2014 and the Donbass War in Crimea, and we rewind to your childhood, so I'm imagining you're a 90s kid like me.
98. That was when I was born.
Oh, wow, you're a 2000s kid.
I'm a 2000s kid.
So, let's start just with home before we even get to the neighborhood. What to you as a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 14-year-old, what were Russian-Ukrainian relations like in your mind?
In my mind, I always kept a very strong Ukrainian identity. It was something I was very proud of. I was proud to speak Ukrainian publicly, even though many Ukrainians would not. Many Ukrainians would prefer to speak Russian, and that's actually how I learned how to speak quite a bit of Russian. I'm not a fluent Russian speaker. I can certainly hold conversations in Russian, but it's something that I have to acknowledge that I learned that through Brighton Beach and living there because of the fact that many people simply didn't want to speak Ukrainian on the streets. Not that you were, if you did, you weren't at a point of danger. No one would try to harm you, but sometimes you would hear Russians passing by, or maybe if they're standing on the streets with friends and groups, sometimes they would make comments and there were jokes and things that would be said. A lot of this simply...
Do you mind sharing? I mean, we don't need to hear slurs or anything, but what was the attitude?
I would say
better than you?
Essentially, yes. It was pretty much a "we're better than you" kind of attitude. We are, we're.
But why? Right? Are we smarter? Are we more urban? What were the negative? Because
I would say
they don't occur to me. I don't know.
The way I could describe it is you have to really understand you have to understand a bit of Russian history, especially with the fact that Russia dominated the Soviet Union. It was the Kremlin that dominated everybody. And many Russians today do see themselves as that kind of superior, group of people because they were the ones in power in that time period. And they ruled over Ukraine and the various other, Soviet satellite republics or states, whatever you'd like to call them. And they see themselves as almost this kind of older brotherly figure. This is where this idea of brotherly nations comes from. I don't agree with it. I never saw, the Russian people as this kind of brotherly people that are benevolent towards me. No, I never really saw them as that because they always showed a bit of a different side. Some of them, I have to say, some of them do realize that. And even though they may acknowledge it, I don't think they actually realize just how deep within this, within their culture, this kind of sentiment permeates. Growing up, this is really what I experienced was Russians really showing this, where it's just these small things, even if it's a comment or a word, or not wanting to, have me speak Ukrainian, them asking me, hey, can you preferably speak Russian or whatever. These small things just kind of add up over time, and I really got
so it's give up your distinctiveness to be more Russian.
Yes. There was a feeling of them trying to impose a sort of Russification on you. And I certainly resisted that.
In Brighton Beach.
Definitely in
Brighton Beach. Getting the equivalent of, speak English or something.
Yes, speak English or something.
Russian, yeah.
If I bring up any sort of negative history about the Soviet Union, Russia, they would certainly deny it. They definitely would always push this kind of idea that in the past we were all okay, we were friendly with one another. In the Soviet days, Ukrainians, Russians didn't hate each other. It was perfectly okay. It was peaceful. And there was never this they would not recognize their imperial and colonial past.
So I call that a fragility.
Yes.
They got
it was
very thin-skinned when certain issues came up.
Yes. And I've had that experience where because I have many Russian friends who live in Brighton Beach, and when I would try to have these discussions with them and bring up these past, just the past in general, there was a huge, just almost like wall. It was almost defensive. It's like, no, this is not it. This is not how it was. This is what was in the past. There was a Soviet Union. Everybody was okay. Russia was in charge. We're all brothers at the end of the day, but we're the bigger brother. You have to listen to us. And I will always reject that. I will always reject that. And many Ukrainians did historically.
So that's so interesting. Can you talk about the flip side of the affinity? And the reason I ask is because, my own background is Jewish American, and, Jews in the United States usually get together based on being Jews. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions. You do see Russian Jews with affinity for other Russians, but let's not turn the exception into the rule. No one was claiming to be a brotherly nation with us. Let's put it that way. So what's the flip side? What does the affinity look like in a place like Brighton Beach?
I would say this. That is a great question. It's something that I have to even think about. But, when it came to Brighton Beach, I'll tell you this. There were certainly the identities. Most people identified as either Russian, Ukrainian, or if they're from anywhere else, they would have that identity. Many, especially of the Jewish population there, although they were certainly very open about the fact that was their religion, and many other Russian Jews would always tell you that they're Russian first.
Interesting.
Yes.
So why did so many Ukrainians move to Brighton Beach? I guess that's what I'm getting at with the affinity question is like, if there's negative relations with Russians, why not move to a different neighborhood?
I'll tell you this honestly, most Ukrainians probably did not know. Because when we moved to Brighton Beach, we understood Brighton Beach as, what it was referred to as Little Odessa. I remember my parents, when I would ask them prior to us moving there, I asked them, where are we going in America? It's such a foreign place to us, and especially me as a young child who's just started growing up in Ukraine. And they told us, don't worry, we're going to a place where we're told there's a lot of Ukrainians, that we have, an influence there. Our people are there. But, of course, moving there, I didn't instantly see that. Many Ukrainians in Ukraine, especially, from where I'm from, when they hear of Brighton Beach, they do think that it was always a Ukrainian neighborhood when it really wasn't. It was
that
much
name Little Odessa.
Yeah, that name Little Odessa is what really stuck over there and what people know Brighton Beach as. And I don't want to deny it, because many Odessans did move during the Soviet days from Ukraine to Brighton, and they certainly were some of the first ones to help create Brighton Beach, but it never was the only sort of identity there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when 2014 came along, and even before then, there was escalating tension with Russia. How did you witness that deterioration in relationship in your own life?
I don't know if I would want to say it was deteriorating back then yet. I would say starting 2008 is when you really would see a huge change around that area of Brighton Beach. And starting in 2008, we really started seeing more Ukrainians moving from Ukraine to New York City, and specifically areas like Brighton. Brighton's not the only place where Ukrainians live in New York City. There's many other areas, but I know that many of them came to Brighton, at least started there, and then would maybe move out to other areas. But we really started seeing more Ukrainians move there. And it was also a different crowd of Ukrainians moving there, because many of the Ukrainians that moved originally, like, my time and even before, they weren't maybe the very hyper-educated crowd or the businessmen. These are maybe just people who were laborers, and they would just be lucky enough to move. 2008, 10, and then 14, we'd start seeing more wealthy Ukrainians, people with money who have businesses in Ukraine, who would come here, the very well-educated Ukrainian crowd that would start coming here, even younger ones or younger people like students who would come here, and that really changed the dynamic.
What is the significance of that class difference? You're saying wealthier and more educated Ukrainians started coming. How does that compare to previous generations? Kind of what difference did it make?
I'll tell you, because when I grew up in Brighton Beach, the people who were usually wealthier, known to be the wealthier crowd, were the Russian Jews. Those are the people with the money who owned the businesses, who, owned a lot of the real estate on Brighton. Because Brighton is like a two-way, two-sided street. And there was a point where it was just a handful of people who really owned a lot of that land or ground or just real estate in general. And it was the Russian Jews. And come in the mid-2000s, 2008, 10, and then 14, we started seeing Ukrainians come in and buy that out. So now suddenly we're seeing a change in where Ukrainians are the ones who are owning or are the owners of these businesses, of the real estate, of the money. And I have to say, it did actually happen quite quietly. It was really quiet. I didn't really fully realize that until the start of the full-scale invasion, where I started to see a lot of these traditionally Russian stores changing their names, getting rid of, signs or any sort of ties to Russia, and asking people about it, asking my mom, who knows many other people. And she told me, you realize that most of these businesses are owned by Ukrainians. There was actually a great example I can tell you. There was this well-known store in Brighton Beach called Taste of Russia. You could even find some Ukrainian goods there. I used to go there just for that, because you can find some Ukrainian goods like candies, the Russian candies, that's delicious. And that was the main place for me to go buy them. As much as I hated going there because it was a place called Taste of Russia, and even a lot of Ukrainians really despised it, but I will not ever forget in my life. It was about maybe 2-3 days after the full-scale invasion last year, and I see them taking down the sign, Taste of Russia. They're completely changing the name of the store, and I'm trying to understand, is this just they're doing this because it's a Russian business owner, but they disagree with Russia and, where Russia is going with this? No, I was told that business was owned by a Ukrainian for some time. And that really struck a chord with me. I'm like, wow, okay. So
there's a sort of like advancement happening.
Yes.
You're telling me Ukrainians are starting to be more in the having some of the power and prestige in the neighborhood.
Yes. We took over in that way. We basically gained the power and the prestige, and we were the ones with the money now, because many of the original Russian Jews who had that money actually would move away. We would definitely see a lot of the Russian crowd move away to different neighborhoods. Some would stay in New York, maybe go to a different borough like Staten Island or just a different area of Brooklyn. But many others would actually move to different states.
Ethnic turnover.
Yeah.